Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Evidence-Based Practices for IBH, Applying Motivational Interviewing, Part 2. My name is Leah Sims, and I'm the Project Coordinator for Practice Improvement for the National Council for Behavioral Health, and I will serve as your moderator today. Before we begin, I would just like to cover a few housekeeping notes. Today's webinar is being recorded, and all participants are currently in listen-only mode. You can find the call-in number for the webinar on the right-hand side of your screen. Please make sure to enter your audio PIN, also provided with your call-in information, in the GoToWebinar window. You may enter your audio PIN at any time during today's session by pressing pound, followed by the audio PIN number, and then pressing pound again. Entering your audio PIN is the only way that we will be able to unmute your line. If you have a question or comment throughout the presentation, please use the raising hand icon and we will unmute you. Alternatively, questions can also be submitted throughout the webinar by typing a question into the dialog box to the right of your screen and sending it to the organizer. Depending on the question, we may type an answer back to you, interrupt the speaker to ask it, or save it for the end. We'll answer as many of your questions as time allows. Following the webinar, we invite you to please complete a short survey. An audio version of the entire webinar and a PDF of the presentation will be uploaded to the Montana Healthcare Foundation website. If at any point during the webinar you experience technical difficulties, please call Citrix Tech Support at 888-259-8414. So without further ado, I will pass things over to Pam, our presenter.
Great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody, and I hope the sound quality is pretty good. I'm calling in from Los Angeles today. I think last time I talked with you all about motivational interviewing, I was in beautiful Helena. Now I'm in very busy Los Angeles. But excited to talk further about motivational interviewing. We're going to do kind of a part 2 today, and I know that there were likely some people that weren't on part 1, but you, I think, have access to it for later, and certainly I think what I talk about today you'll be able to probably pull the pieces together. I will refer back to a couple of things that we spoke about last time just in order to keep the thread moving. But if not, hopefully you'll be able to catch up and jump right in. So today we can go to, and I'm still getting to where I can see what you've got, Leah, but I assume you're on my slide that says, how are we doing? And yep. Thank you. This is a check-in to say, I know motivational interviewing can seem very simple, and yet we are busy. We know our clients are busy. We know that there is this, quote, resistance at times, and so it's a reminder that there's a lot of pressures on everybody, and as we do motivational interviewing, the way in which it is effective is if we remember that none of us don't always see things as they are because we only see things as we are. We can only bring our own perspective or our own truth. So sometimes I'm asked, and I may have been asked on this webinar last time, how do you work with someone who is maybe not seeing the same reality you are, or is insisting that, this is the problem? And so I wanted to start this webinar with that reminder that we only have our own truth. And so motivational interviewing asks us to appreciate the other person's perspective and step away from our own, because a big part of it is partnership. And so if we can be aware of the other person's perspective by asking open-ended questions, by inviting their input, their feedback to what is happening, we're going to be better able to engage with them and then hopefully drive change to happen. So if we go to the next slide, these are some common ways in which we think we're helping people change, but aren't typically as effective as we would like them to be. On the left side there, it says, I can rescue her. So we often go into healthcare professions because we want to be able to help people and serve people. But it's a reminder that we have to be careful not to get into a rescue mentality, if you will. This belief that, if they come to me, I can fix things and I can make everything better and I can, do some things that will help them succeed, but in a way that is rescuing, which isn't as effective as helping people facilitating the change based on their own abilities to figure out what's going to work best for them. The gavel on the right-hand side is remembering not to impose our own judgment. This idea of, oh, he just doesn't get it, or, geez, this person, I already know that they're not going to be able to be successful with this. Or, gosh, I'm already aware of what is going to happen if they go down this road. And not assuming that we do know. We may be surprised by people's ability to make successful changes. The one on the bottom left, the kid is doomed, is, we also can't assume to be mind readers or be able to predict what could happen with someone. We want to assume the best, and we may not see people at their best. It's the whole reason they're coming in to see us. But remembering to similarly set aside the judgment in the sense of assuming that we know what that future holds for the person. People surprise us all the time with their resilience or their ability to change. And so that's another reminder that that isn't a way that is going to be successful. And then the bottom right, we often go to this without realizing it, that, sense of I'm just going to tell them what to do because that's what needs to happen. And I don't have time for all of this motivational interviewing stuff. But just telling somebody they need to do it isn't usually a way of making long-term change. It's got to come from within with our facilitation. So the next slide is, we have to think, people will say, I don't have time to do motivational interviewing, or isn't that going to take more time? And, I only have so much time to work with them. Or I've been working with them for a long time and nothing's going to change. If you consider how much time you may have spent with someone having the same conversation over and over again, and you don't see change happening, so we go to these shortcuts of, you know what, I just have to tell you, you have to quit smoking, and here's how you do it. What that ends up doing is really creating a bobblehead effect where the client just nods, maybe they smile, with no real intent to change because we haven't tapped into their motivation. So if we think we don't have time for this, we should also think about the ways in which we maybe have been having conversations, and if they haven't been proven to be effective, maybe we need to have a different kind of conversation. So with that, the next slide, the motivational interviewing folks will say, I don't remember if this slide was there before, but it's an important one to see again. Instead of thinking about a client or a situation as being resistant, that there's resistance to change or a person is unmotivated to change, the motivational interviewing experts will say, try to see it as more of a discrepancy in the way we're viewing the world. So similar to that first slide, where there's my truth and there's your truth, and somewhere in the middle is probably the truth. But maybe it's a discrepancy in how we're both seeing the world. So I think you need to, quit smoking pot because you'll be a healthier person and maybe you can get a job. But that's just my view. And maybe there's a discrepancy in what you want to do to reach certain goals, or the way in which you're perceiving the ability to quit, that maybe it's a really hard habit to break, or it's providing you some kind of perceived benefit that I'm not maintaining an awareness of. So resistance versus discrepancy is another way to help us not sort out if we say, I'm not feeling like I'm making progress with this person. So maybe there's a discrepancy in what we're seeing. And so how do I reach in and uncover that? So the next slide is another way of thinking about what motivational interviewing is trying to do. It's a shift in the way we think about the work we do. So what the slide says here is the shift from feeling responsible for changing another person's behavior instead to supporting them in thinking and talking about their own reasons and means or ability for behavior change. So I might feel responsible for working with a 16-year-old that's smoking pot, and I'm thinking this kid's got to stop and it's dangerous, and as the adult I need to make sure they know that. And this is shifting our thinking to saying, how can I support this kiddo in talking about reasons they might want to make a change in that behavior, reducing their use or, avoiding some of the risks. So how can I support them in identifying what those reasons could be? The next slide so last time we talked a lot about some of the strategies. Now it's taking it a little step further to say, what are we really listening for when we get that other person talking? We're listening for their own arguments for change. And what this is called is change talk, conversations that lead a person toward change. And they've got this acronym here of darn cat, hence the picture. So it's listening for the other person to express their desire to make a change, their ability. Maybe there's no desire, but there is ability. That's something. Also their reasons or their needs for change. And the CAT acronym is even stronger language toward change. If they are expressing a commitment, I could go to that meeting and see how it is. Or, maybe I'm willing to take action or a small step in some way. And if we hear any of these types of words or expressions of change, this is what we really want to pay the most attention to, because it's the other person already arguing for change. So what does this look like? On the next slide, these are the kinds of things we might hear from a client. I need to get my life back in control, or I know I'm overweight. It's just really hard to lose weight. I want to get out of this hospital bed. I don't want my kids to pick up smoking habit, or I can't live like this anymore. A lot of these may sound like complaints or resistance, as I mentioned earlier, but there's actually a great deal of opportunity in statements like these, because these are expressions of change. I need to get my life back in control. There's a need. And we would want to ask more about that. Tell me what it would look like if your life was back in control. Or we would just reflect and say it back. Something that's really important to you is getting your life back. Someone that says, I know I'm overweight. There's already an awareness there. So we might say, what do you already know about healthy weight? What's a healthy weight for your age and gender or such? I can't live like this anymore. They're already saying what they don't want. They don't want this kind of life. So we would want to speak to that and ask them about that more. So any of these are change talk, and this is where reflections and open-ended questions and affirmations come in. So with the next slide, I've got a polling question. And Leah, you have to help me make sure I'm not quite seeing what you're seeing. But what it is I'm asking you to take a look at 3 statements. And my question is, which of these is an example of change talk? So A is, I tried giving up alcohol. B is, I don't understand why I have to take these meds. And C is, this is a waste of time. So think about what the darn cat acronym stood for: desire, ability, reasons, need, commitment, action, and taking steps. And choose which one of these you think is the best example or an example of change talk.
So about 50% have already voted, so maybe just give it a few more seconds.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Great. So it looks like 69% said A, I tried giving up alcohol. 23% said C, I don't understand why I have to take these meds. And 8% said this is a waste of time.
Okay. All right. And guess what? I can see it. I'm finally in. So,
Good.
So good. I can better follow along. Yes. So let's talk a little bit about these. So the the clearest example of change talk in these is A, I tried giving up alcohol. Now, what this is an expression of ability, right? So maybe it was failed ability, but we want to find out more about that. And assuming it's failed ability is my example of putting on a judgment, right? So if the person says, I tried giving up alcohol, what's probably going to follow is, but it was too hard, but I went back to it, some kind of but statement. And that's okay, because what that's showing is that this person, can see both sides of that, and we want to capitalize on the fact that they did have an attempt. So I tried shows some ability, and we would want to ask about that or affirm that. So a lot of things we would do with that. We'd say, there's a little change talk going on here. So we would say, gosh, you tried before. What was that like? And they might then tell us all the bad things. Oh, it was really hard, or I couldn't do it, or I, fell off the wagon. But we'd want to honor that and say, gosh, but you were willing to try. Or you had, how long of a period of time did you go without using? Oh, I only went 3 months and then I was drinking again. Wow, what were those 3 months like? Yeah, I bet it was really a big change for you. What are some of the strategies you tried at the time to make you successful for 3 full months? So it's seeing the positive in an attempt to help the person shift their own thinking around, any success is success. And if you were able to do it 3 months, how can we tap into some of that to maybe make it, 4 months the next time, or 5 months? So I tried is something that we would want to work with. The second choice that some people chose, I don't understand why I have to take these meds. There's not a lot of obvious change talk in there, but I similarly would try to tease that out to say, you're wondering why you have to take these meds. No, they didn't say that. And that might fall flat. But I might say it just to try and see if there is some interest in wanting to understand. So that's where that plays out. And then this is a waste of time. Similarly, isn't change talk, but with any of these, I would dig deeper and say, what would be a better use of your time while you're here with me? So non-change talk, sometimes you can try and turn it to see if it takes you somewhere. Okay, so with that, let's go on to the next slide. I mentioned this but statement in there, right? And that's often a sign of ambivalence. And ambivalence is normal. Ambivalence is this seesaw that many of us are on 10 times a day, 15 times a day or more. It's this thinking about, I could do this and maybe I won't do that. It's the change talk of, yes, I want to get in shape, along with the sustain talk, which is the staying the way it is. But maybe I'll try next Monday, right? Or I could eat healthier, but it's pretty hard because there's only fast food restaurants near me. So allowing clients to be on this seesaw, pointing out both sides of it, actually can benefit them in being able to recognize that, there's pros and cons. Or most of us are not usually in a total absolute state of, I don't want to get in shape. I want to get in shape, and there's some things that make it harder to do so. So allowing that ambivalence and saying, sounds like you're feeling a little ambivalent about this, or sounds like you're seeing that there are 2 sides of this. Let's explore both sides. With the next slide, there is some research that says that the amount of change talk is actually more predictive of change than the amount of perceived readiness. So someone may say, I'm just not ready to completely give up smoking. Or we might sense, I don't think this person's ready to make a really big change. But what the research says is that it's not the frequency, but it is the strength of the commitment language. So if someone tells us one time, they express some commitment. Yeah, I'm willing to go to that support group. Let's work with that. Because they might then follow it with, but it's hard, but I don't know if I could really make it, but, I'd have to get off work. the fact that they expressed a commitment, the linguistic studies will say that actually demonstrates more readiness because they said it and that's starting to talk themselves into changing. So we want to use reflections in a moment like that to try and stay on that commitment language as much as possible. So the next slide I just wanted to bring us back to, so what is all of this that I'm speaking to? It's those OARS that I talked about last time. It's asking open-ended questions, affirming. So in the last example, if they expressed a commitment of, yeah, I probably could go, we want to affirm that. You're willing to take a chance, or you're willing to give it a try, or, you're up for seeing what it would be like to attend that appointment. That's an affirmation. Reflections is saying back what you heard from the other person, and this would be the thing to reflect. We wouldn't necessarily want to spend a lot of time reflecting all of the sustained talk or all of these statements that don't favor change. We might need to a little bit so they know we did hear that and we do acknowledge that it's hard and things like that. But we really want to reflect on the change. And then summarizing anything in favor of change. So with the OARS in mind, the next slide is a way to also take that into account with change talk. So you would use some open-ended questions to boost change talk in these forms. To boost a person's desire for change, you might ask, what would need to happen for you to want to make a change? And they then talk about what they want. Or, if this happened, I would want to make a change. And it just gets them thinking and exploring. To boost ability, you might ask, how would you do it if you decided? So the person says, you know what, I'm not going to try and get sober again. It was just too hard last time. So you might ask, how would you do it if you decided? Would you do it differently than you approached it last time? What are some of the things you tried last time that you would use? And they can say, oh, I'm not going to. And this isn't asking them to commit. This is just asking them to think through how they would do it. And that helps plant that seed, right? So maybe they do think about it. And they come back and they say, I think I'm ready now. Or I tried some of those things we talked about, but it enhances ability. And then the last two open-ended questions there, what are the 3 best reasons? Just clearly as a way of asking, what would be reasons for you? And then what's most important to you to get at the need? What would be the need for this person? So you ask, what's important? With the next slide, so what I wanted to do here is I pulled out our guy from last time. So I don't know that I gave him a name, but let's call him Jim. So this is Jim, and last time I presented this, so let's bring it back. He says, I've been coming to this clinic for 10 years, ever since I found out I have diabetes. When the panic attacks started a few months ago, I didn't think I could handle another health problem. I'm still seeing the therapist, but I don't know if it's helping. I'm overwhelmed and just want to get back in control. So today, now that we've been thinking about change talk, I want you to think about, first of all, if you're seeing any change talk in here, and then if you can start to think about how you would use affirmations and reflection to enhance some of that potential change talk. Okay, so look it over for a moment again before I give you some of the things I was paying attention to. I've been coming to this clinic for 10 years. I didn't think I could handle another health problem. I just want to get back in control. And then if we click again, Leah, I've got some things underlined that I thought were worth unpacking, if you will. So if you, yeah, there we go. So for me, as I think about how to maximize my time with this person, thinking about change talk, the things I underlined here are the things that if you were to pay most attention to, it might help this person think about their change. So coming to this clinic for 10 years, boy, I would probably affirm that. You've been a steady patient of ours for a long time, or your health has been important to you, or, you've been very committed to, coming to our center. Now, that isn't exactly what this person said, but, it's the idea of speaking further to their commitment, their ability, right? So, or you could just simply say, you've been coming to this clinic for a long time. Any of those things are enhancing, hopefully starting to plant the seed around change. So the second thing I underlined, I didn't think I could handle another health problem. Another opportunity to affirm or reflect. Yeah, when this, when panic attacks started, that sounded like it was going to be overwhelming, and yet you've been trying to figure out how to handle those. Or you've been persistent in not only managing your diabetes, but trying to figure out how you could best be successful with this new, form of anxiety you're having, right? So taking a statement like that and using it to that person's benefit. The next one, I'm still seeing the therapist. I would reflect, you've really stuck with it. Even though you're not always sure it's helping, that's what they said, but you've stuck with it. Or I'd ask a question too. I know that isn't part of my instructions there, but you could ask a question about that too. What is it about continuing to see this therapist has helped you stay persistent with it? And then lastly, the last part of this here, I want to get back in control. I want is an expression of desire. So I would really focus on that a lot. That's where I would say you're really committed to finding a solution. Or I know these panic attacks have really been something additional on your plate, and you really want to get things back to feeling more comfortable, more in control. So those are the kinds of things that bring change talk into this way of using motivational interviewing to try and build on the person's own inner strengths or their own statements in favor of change. In fact, I went to a training with Bill Miller, one of the people that created motivational interviewing, and he told us at the training that he had a patient who said, hearing myself say it out loud had more meaning than just thinking about it. So the person says it out loud, we repeat it, or we repeat a version of it, it gives it that much more potential or power. So that's the idea behind saying this and using the person's statements to help them make a change. And if we are the ones to bring it up, then they're only thinking about it. Hopefully they're at least thinking about it. But them saying it is what we want to really build on. Okay, so with that, I have another polling question. And with this one, so the client says, it all went downhill when I got kicked out of my apartment. I want to get back on track, but getting a little high and having drinks with friends are the only things I have left to enjoy. So now I asked you to look at that statement from the client and think about what you could reflect that would optimize this person's change talk. A lot of things we could reflect. I've said a lot of things. Which of these is most optimal? So let me read again the client statement. It all went downhill when I got kicked out of my apartment. I want to get back on track, but getting a little high and having drinks with friends are the only things I left to enjoy. So now think about what you would reflect that would be the optimal type of reflection. And Leah, while people are responding, can you just let me know sound check-wise, is sound okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, good.
You're coming very quickly.
Great.
So we have about 68% of people voted, so we'll just give it another second.
Great.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll.
Ooh, we got a sharp audience. All right, so most people said the most optimal reflection is you want to get back on track. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about each of these, but definitely that's the most optimal in my mind, because they said they want, we know that that's change talk, so we would want to reflect the heck out of that, right? We'd want to say, you want to get back on track. That was their words. It's an expression of a need or a want, and that's the kind of something that hopefully we can keep talking about and explore ways to get back on track. It might lead to them talking about reasons to get on track, action steps they might take. So yes, that's ideally the best one. I'm appreciating that there's at least someone or a few people out there that chose the last one, which says, you know you need help. So what I wanted to talk about with that one is, that is a statement that we might want to give. The reason it's not the most optimal is only simply because Jim, or our person here, well, I guess this one isn't Jim, but in the client statement, they didn't say those words exactly. They didn't say, I want help, or I need help, or I know I need help. So it might be a leap too far forward. Now, none of this is a lot of this is going to be unpredictable because we don't know where the client's going to go with their next statement. We don't know which thing is going to be, helping us connect with them. So if we know them really well and we are inferring with our best judgment, this isn't necessarily a terrible thing to reflect. But given what they've told us so far, it might be too big of a leap. And then clearly the other two that no one chose anyway, you were kicked out of your apartment or you enjoy getting high, are not change talk. Now, we might still choose to reflect those. If we're still getting to know them, we're still trying to engage, we want them to feel trust, that there's trust being built, we might want to acknowledge, before we move into the change talk, we might just want to acknowledge those things to show we're listening. But if we really want to optimize hearing change talk and speaking it back, we're going to say, you want to get back on track. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So the last time we talked, we got to go to the next one too, Leah. There we go. The last time I did the webinar, I spoke to that there's 4 processes to moving someone through a motivational interviewing conversation toward change. So all of the last webinar and up until now, it's really been about engaging and focusing and evoking change from the other person. Now, if we've done those pieces really well, we can move to a planning phase. The thinking behind this, though, is that it's still motivational interviewing if we've done a really nice job of engaging, focusing, and evoking. And planning is really just the icing on top. Hopefully, the person wants to do some planning with us. If they're not ready to do planning, but we've really done a nice job of the other 3, we still have had a good likelihood of change happening. It may just happen independent of them talking to us. But if we've done all of those things and we want to see if the person wants to do some planning with us, then we go to this next step. So the next slide is the next place to take this, which is to find what fits, at least with the language that you use. So if you say, hey, let's set up a plan, or what would be your goal? That may work for some people. It may not for others. It might scare some people off, or it might just sound like too big of a leap. So you might try other phrases and see if that feels more comfortable. Like, what if you were to try something different? Something different doesn't sound, in some cases, like as much of a change. So, maybe that resonates and they say, oh, okay, yeah, let's think of something different. I'm willing to do that. Or you might say, what could we do for a trial run? Or what would be an experiment? I've heard some really, really savvy care managers use the term experiment. What would you be wanting to try for the next couple of weeks? Or what could we experiment with? Because we don't know what's going to fit. We don't know if going cold turkey is going to work for you. Or we don't, you don't know yet because you haven't tried cutting out carbs or whatever they say they want to try, right? So that can be kind of a lower resource or less scary to try something in this way. So that's one idea for starting to do some planning. The next slide, we may be tempted or we may be asked for advice. We may be tempted to give it unsolicited, or they may say, okay, so what should I do? Regardless, if we are going to give any kind of advice or information or psychoeducation, do it in the spirit of the motivational interviewing spirit, which I talked quite a bit about last time, which are these 4 dimensions of partnership and compassion, evoking, and accepting, ultimately, the other person's decision. So a way in which you could do this is a strategy called the MI sandwich. And on the next slide, I'll lay out for you what that looks like. So the MI sandwich says if we're going to give information or advice, do it in a sandwiched way, where we start with eliciting from the other person, would you like to hear more about ways you could, cut back on your substance use? Or what do you already know about quitting smoking pot, whatever the example is. So eliciting from them first, either eliciting permission to give some information, eliciting what they already know. That way, when you do give your advice, they're more open to hearing it. You're more able to tailor it based on what they either already know or want to know. And it makes it much more meaningful and purposeful. And then, very importantly, the other part of the sandwich there is to elicit their thoughts, because we want to try and help them to stay in the driver's seat, feel like they have control over the situation. So we would elicit, what do you think about what I just described? Or how, if at all, has this impacted your thinking? Or what might be your next step? Any of those things gives them the ability to say, I disagree, or sounds interesting, or I'm really confused, or all right, I'm ready, or I'm not ready. And that's what we want, right? We want to let them continue to express their ability and their reasons for making this change. So that's the MI sandwich. The next slide is another tool, if you will, that some people use in this phase of planning, where they say, I'm still just not sure. So similar to just doing pros and cons, it's a few additional steps where you take them through these series of boxes, and the order is important. So you want to start with box 1, and you say, what would be good about not making a change? What would be good about just keeping things the way they are right now? And allowing the person to express that. Because if any of us can think about times we've been ambivalent, there's times where we can easily say, too, that not going out and exercising or, not taking the leap to quit smoking, it can be a comfortable place, too. So allowing people to feel that and express it. Then we want to go to box 2, which is, what would be not so good about not changing? Then moving on to box 3, what would be not so good about changing? Acknowledging there's some reasons not to change. And then we do want to land in box 4. We're still giving equal weight to all boxes, but we want to land in box 4 because hopefully when they start to express the good things about change, that takes the conversation in that direction. So, you let people kind of think through, okay, what do you make of this? Or, where do you want to go from here? And ideally, we want to, hope that they want to go with the change. The next slide is another tool that very common to use in motivational interviewing, which is called Readiness Rulers. So you might ask, on a scale of 0 to 10, how important is it? Or how confident are you? Or just how ready are you? And allow people to think through, why they landed where they did in this scale of 0 to 10. Important to doing an exercise like this with someone is whatever number they choose, continue to go with that positive thinking, which is, why did they choose that number and not a lesser number? So if someone says, yeah, well, it's about a 2 for importance, that's great, right? Wow, you picked a 2. Some people pick a 0 or 1, and you didn't. So why is it at least a 2? And honor that, because anything they say, the number's sort of irrelevant, right? What a 2 means to me might be really different for you, but let them speak to it. Well, it's at least a 2 because, this emphysema has really gotten really hard, and I worry that I'm not going to be around for my grandkids. Wow, that's pretty powerful stuff. That just raised their own level of importance. Got them using more change talk. You might ask after that, what would it take to get to a higher number? But I would not start there, because that can start, if you start there, that can be very defeating. It's, oh, well, A 9 would be great, but then I'd have to do, and then you get some of that stuck language. So asking why they chose the number they did and not a lesser number. And most people won't say 0 just because they want to look good or they don't want the hassle of thinking you're going to come down on them for choosing that number. So usually you get a little space there to work with. The next slide is just a simple reminder of, if you're going to set a plan with someone, get as many details as possible. Identify barriers. Don't say, could anything get in the way, but just say, I assume things could. So what kinds of things for you could get in the way? So you can get those out in the open. Start small relative to what the person thinks is small. Maybe it's not too small, but ask them. Getting it in writing, there's some research that shows we're 40% more likely to follow through on something if we've written it down. So don't write it down for them. Ask them to write it down. Or if you need to document, ask them to also write it down. So with that, I want to make sure we have time here. The next slide is I want to do a little activity with you all, which is, so I'm your client, and I say to you, yeah, I know I should get more sleep. I'd like to have you take a moment to enter into the chat box what you might ask me or what you might say next to help me with goal setting. So if you think about some of those tools I just presented or some of those other specifics for developing a plan, if I'm your client and this is what I said, yeah, I know I should get more sleep, what might you ask or say next to help further refine that goal? Because the temptation is to just say, oh, great, okay, this person said they're willing to work on their sleep. And we move on because we're busy and we've got another person waiting and we finally got them talking about sleep. But don't stop there. And instead, give me some other questions or statements that you might give. So, Leah, when you're ready, if you could read some of the things people have typed, I'd be curious to hear what people would do with this.
Sure. So we have one, and I'm sure other people are typing, but one person says, what do you think would be the benefits of getting more sleep?
Nice. Very nice. Right? So that's like that pros and cons thing. Let's go with that. Let's say, what would be the benefits for you? And that's so nice because it's also not inserting what you're assuming or thinking would be the benefits, right? That's the truth where we started. My truth versus your truth. I'm instantly going to go to what my own belief system is about sleep. That maybe I don't personally get enough sleep and or I get a lot of sleep, or I'm already suspecting this person, is on their phone at night, like the picture. The example that the person there just gave, thank you, says it isn't about me. It's about this other person. So let's find out from them. What would be the benefits? What do you see as benefits? Because that's change talk. They're going to say things, who knows what they're going to say, but it might be things like, then I maybe would be more alert at work. Or, yeah, because I already know I use my phone a lot at night. And that's person-centered. And that's where we can build from, is understanding that person's truth and using that to help them drive change. So A+ to the person that just suggested that. Any other?
Yeah, so I think, oh, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Nope, just asking. Other input that came through.
Yeah, so we have a few other responses. So one person says, what would create more opportunities to get more sleep? And similarly, another person said, what methods have you already tried to help you get sleep?
Fabulous. Very nice. So what methods have you already tried is the start of a sandwich, right? The sandwiched approach. Because as tempting as it might be when the person says, I know I should get more sleep, as tempting as it is to want to then provide all this information about sleep hygiene and, putting your phone away. Before we do that, let's find out from them. How have they already attempted to get more sleep? What are opportunities? Because we're meeting them where they're at. And from there, we may want to give a little advice or, correct something if they misspeak. But way more important to find out from them where they're at with that. And maybe or maybe we won't end up giving advice. So another A+.
And then we have two more. So one person says, sounds like sleep is important to you. How much are you currently sleeping? And then should I go ahead and read the last?
Yeah, please do.
And then the last one is, why do you think you need more sleep?
Super. So the first one was an example of a great reflection. Sounds like it's important to you to get more sleep. And by throwing that word important in, it gives the client a chance to add to that about the importance, which is change talk, right? Yeah, it's really important to me because X and Y and Z, and we want to work with that. Yeah, and understanding from the other person, you know, what for them would be more sleep, or what would be a better amount of sleep, because, you know, maybe they're already getting 8 hours and they think they need more, they want more. Or maybe they're only getting 2 hours. So, wow, that's a different starting point than they're getting 6 hours. Or, you know, they've had chronic sleep problems their whole life. Any of those things are exploring where they're already coming from. So really nice examples. Thank you for those. I have just a couple other slides, and I want to make sure there's time for questions and other comments. So the next slide is another way of thinking about wrapping up the time you've spent with someone, is to use this acronym SO, which is to summarize anything they said in favor of change, emphasize their strengths, and then, you know, conclude with what agreement was reached. You know, maybe both have a little bit of homework, you know. So the client is going to, you know, put their phone downstairs when they go upstairs to sleep in order to get better sleep. And the therapist is going to, you know, find some information on, you know, sleep aids or whatever it might be. So that's the kind of way to wrap it up in a strengths-based motivational interviewing way. And then I wanted to leave you with some resources. The last slide that I have is, the first is the main motivational interviewing book. It's been updated 3 times, the 3rd edition. The second one is a book specific to health behaviors, so a lot of physical health behaviors for folks if you work in that kind of setting or are interested in that. The third one is a workbook if you are someone that likes, you know, I was a kid, I liked activity books. So it's you know, blank pages, not fully blank pages, but, you know, a phrase and then a blank line where you write in, you know, how you would respond to that, or it's true and false quizzes, things like that. The next one is a website. It's a group called MINT, Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, that they have a lot of resources on their website. Or if you would like to pursue being a MINT trainer, it's a group independent of Miller and Rolnick. It's kind of a self-started group of fellow MI people that have gotten some specific training. The next one is our website with some MI information. And then the last one, if you're interested, is a YouTube video with Steve Rolnick himself doing some motivational interviewing. And there are certainly a lot of resources on YouTube as well, different demos. This one in particular I really like because it's one of the experts using it, and he just does a nice example of all of these pieces. And he uses it with a somewhat resistant, if you will, client or discrepancy, as I mentioned earlier. So it's kind of fun to see it play out. So with that, I have 6 minutes left on my clock. We can turn to any questions or comments that have come in. And I really welcome input, comments too, as far as people saying, you know, hey, fellow Montanans, here's a local resource, or, you know, here's some of the ways I've used MI. So, you know, any kind of question or comment, please feel free to share. And if not, Leah, I don't know if there's any housekeeping or additional information about getting these resources or these slides after the fact. Feel free to share any last comments.